It was a cold, foggy morning on April 10th, 1741. The 28-year-old Prussian king Frederick II appeared in the small town of Mollwitz in Silesia. With his army of approximately 22,000 men, he took advantage of the cover of darkness and fog to infiltrate the nearby Habsburg forces. Due to campfires and poor mobility, the soldiers had no idea that a larger force was approaching. Frederick ordered his soldiers to take up positions and form battle lines. His right-hand man, the veteran Prussian general Kurt von Schwerin, had warned him. Had he deployed his army in battle lines, the element of surprise would have disappeared long ago. Frederick paid no attention to these warnings, despite repeated pleas from his officers. Reflecting on this battle many years later, Frederick acknowledged that he should have carried out his plan. It would have been a fatal mistake. Unfortunately, the Battle of Mollwitz, Frederick the Great's baptism of fire, was about to begin. Since the Treaty of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War in 1648, the Holy Roman Empire had been in a state of flux. It was a patchwork of states, possessions and duchies, with German princes striving to seize as much power as possible. Over the years, Britain and Russia joined the two great European powers, Austria and France, while Poland, Spain and the Ottoman Empire declined. The Netherlands and Sweden were unable to maintain their place among Europe's giants. In October 1740, Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI of the House of Habsburg died without a male heir. Before his death, he issued a decree abdicating the throne. This meant that the hereditary Habsburg lands were allowed to pass to a woman, his daughter Maria Theresa. However, internal strife within Austria led to a weak and divided empire. Austria had just become embroiled in the War of the Polish Succession, and had concluded a fragile peace with the Ottomans. But the Austrian Habsburgs were not alone in their precarious situation. In Russia, Tsarina Anna died, and factions at court vied for power, resulting in her infant son, Ivan VI, taking the throne. The British were preoccupied with a war against Spain, and France was eager to weaken its arch-rival, the Habsburgs. Once Maria Theresa ascended the throne, many European monarchs reneged on their promise to recognize her. Meanwhile, amid these turbulent European events, one young monarch was unwilling to play by the rules. In May 1740, King Frederick William I of Prussia died. Known as the Soldier King, he had spent his entire reign expanding his army, allocating crown revenues to the training and development of his troops. When he died, he was succeeded by his 27-year-old son, Frederick II. He inherited a disciplined, modern, and relatively large army, including a well-equipped war chest. Their good finances contrasted with the less-than-ideal financial situation of Bavaria and Saxony, whose subsequent rulers spent lavishly on palaces, ceremonies, and the acquisition of titles. The Elector of Saxony, Augustus III, assumed the offices of King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Meanwhile, despite the electorate's precarious financial situation, the Elector of Bavaria, Charles Albert, challenged the claim of Maria Theresa's husband, Francis, Duke of Lorraine, to be Holy Roman Emperor. As an elector, and thus able to cast the imperial vote, Frederick felt he should not give up his vote in vain. To ensure he had both sides, he assured the Elector of Bavaria that he supported his claim to the throne, albeit secretly, so that he could negotiate with Maria Theresa if she proved to have the upper hand. The confident young king thus found himself in a highly advantageous position. The geopolitical balance in Europe was extremely fragile, with the major powers preoccupied with other issues. So, when Frederick learned of the Habsburgs' annexation of Bavaria and then the Saxons, he realized he had to act quickly if he wanted to be written down in history books. If we believe him, his motivation was simple. As he said, "I was seduced by the satisfaction of having my name in journals and later in history." The logical target was Silesia, which generated the most taxes from the Habsburg lands. Moreover, Silesia was one of the most advanced industrial regions at the time. Using the infrastructure left to him by his father, he mobilized his army far more quickly than any other European country. In late October, Frederick learned of the emperor's death, and by December 16th, his armies had crossed the Silesian border. It was an unprovoked and unexpected attack by a small group against the leading ruling dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire and a major power. There were only a handful of Habsburg troops stationed there, 4,000 at best. By January 17th, the entire province was under his control, with the exception of a few fortresses, including Brig and Neisse. Meanwhile, Frederick engaged in active and energetic diplomacy with his ministers at home, the European courts, and even Vienna. Upon hearing of Frederick's brutal invasion, the entire Habsburg court reacted with shock, horror, and outrage. Maria Theresa sent an army of around 20,000 troops under Wilhelm Reinhard von Neipperg to recapture Silesia via Moravia. There was only contempt for Frederick's atrocities. Neipperg surprised the inexperienced Frederick while he was asleep. He advanced swiftly west, dismantled the besieged fortress of Neisse, and marched on Breslau. Neipperg's position cut Frederick off from his kingdom, his headquarters, and his supply lines. Frederick was now forced to retreat hastily to prevent Neipperg from consolidating his position. A race broke out between the two armies, each trying to reach the other. However, Frederick received valuable intelligence. Several captured Austrian soldiers revealed Neipperg's positions near the village of Mollwitz. Thanks to fog and a light drizzle, Frederick's army was able to approach Neipperg's camp unnoticed. What followed was a clear sign of Frederick's inexperience. Instead of using the element of surprise, he took his time deploying his army in a single line, adhering to all the rules. Furthermore, he miscalculated the distance to the nearby river, deploying several units behind a bend and others at a 90-degree angle to his main battle line. In the midst of all this, Neipperg noticed. His soldiers were preparing food and often heading in the wrong direction. They deployed to the villages of Mollwitz and Groningen. In a panic, he deployed his entire army. Thanks to their calm caution, this took over an hour. Thanks to Frederick's deliberation, he allowed his enemy to position themselves in a suitable battle line. In terms of army composition, the Prussians enjoyed several advantages. The Austrians had about 19,000 troops, while the Prussians had 21,600. Furthermore, they used an iron rod, an innovative method of increasing the rate of fire of their flintlocks. As a result, the Prussian infantry fired 3 times faster than the Austrians. Furthermore, Frederick's late father had trained the Prussians, making them famous for their discipline. In contrast, many of the Austrians were new recruits. Frederick's infantry and artillery outnumbered the Austrians. However, the Austrian cavalry outnumbered the Prussians by a factor of 2. The Austrians positioned their army in a long line, with cavalry on its flanks. Meanwhile, Frederick himself commanded the right wing of his army, which consisted of a mixed cavalry-infantry division. The 2 centre lines consisted of Prussian infantry. On the left stood the vastly superior Prussian cavalry. Around 2 p.m., Frederick ordered his artillery to open fire and the 2 centre lines to advance toward the enemy positions. This was Frederick's first serious combat experience. Several shells fell on the Austrian left flank, where up to 5,000 cavalry were positioned. Realizing they were under fire, they took the initiative and, without waiting for orders, decided to launch an attack on the Prussian cavalry. The latter made no attempt to repel the attack, even though a numerically superior Austrian force was attacking them head-on. When the two sides clashed, the damage to the Prussians was heavy. Frederick's presence among them was minimal. Many were defeated. Eyewitness accounts describe Frederick as having acted with incredible courage, risking his life more than once with almost reckless abandon and madness. As the Prussian cavalry collapsed and fled, the right flank of the central infantry lines was exposed. Part of the Austrian cavalry charged towards them. The situation looked bleak, if not hopeless, for the Prussians. The battle had only just begun, and they had completely lost control of the battlefield. General Kurt Christoph, Count von Schwerin, urged Frederick to withdraw. Realizing his disadvantageous position, the king heeded this warning. He fled east with his cavalry unit and was almost surrounded. With Frederick's departure, Schwerin, an experienced general, assumed command. Despite his experience, Schwerin faced a daunting task. By this time, the Prussian cavalry had been completely dispersed, and the Austrian cavalry was launching dangerous raids and continuous attacks on the Prussian infantry. Friendly fire from the second echelon on the first echelon was not uncommon, but the Prussian infantry held firm. They continued to fire on the Austrian cavalry and engaged them in close combat. Their commander was killed, and they suffered heavy losses. When the Austrian infantry regiments tried to join the fight and relieve the pressure on the cavalry, they suffered the brunt of the rapid and sudden Prussian bombardment. After a while, the Prussian infantry finally repulsed the Austrian cavalry. Schwerin then ordered the surviving infantry to plunder the ammunition of the dead soldiers. He rallied the majority of the Prussian infantry on his right flank. He then ordered the right flank to advance. The left flank received the same order shortly thereafter. The Prussian fortress advanced, pausing between advances to fire at the enemy. They quickly repulsed a hesitant charge by the Austrian right cavalry. An Austrian survivor of that moment said, "The enemy army advanced from all sides. They had a numerical superiority of up to 3,000 men. We were surrounded on both sides. I can confidently say that I have never seen anything more impressive in my life." They advanced with great steadiness, in straight, dice-like ranks, as if they were on a parade ground. Their polished weapons, shining in the sunlight, made an astonishing impression, and their volleys were like continuous thunder. Our army was completely demoralized. Our infantry could no longer hold out, and our cavalry no longer had the will to form ranks to face the enemy. The Prussian right wing was the first to reach the Austrians. Along with the exchange of fire, the front lines engaged in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. Fierce fighting extended along the entire Austrian line. This continued for some time. The Prussian left joined in shortly thereafter. The Austrian left was the first to defect. When they saw their fellow soldiers fleeing the battlefield, other soldiers defected and fled their ranks. Neberg realized that they were losing momentum. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to emerge victorious from this situation. Late in the afternoon, Neberg ordered a formal withdrawal. Due to the lack of cavalry and the approaching darkness, the Prussians decided not to pursue the Austrians. Instead, Schwerin sent a messenger to Frederick to inform him of the victory. The Austrians retreated to Neisse. the Prussians besieged Brig and captured it on May 4th. Frederick made several fatal mistakes during the battle, which he acknowledged. However, the letters he sent to ministers and close relatives after the battle completely omitted the role of poor Schwerin in the battle. His departure from the battlefield may have had multiple causes. The most obvious conclusion is that Frederick fled voluntarily, although many primary sources and later historical analyses agree that he showed great courage during the battle itself. It is more likely that he left at the repeated entreaties of General Schwerin. Nevertheless, the new Prussian king successfully challenged one of Europe's greatest dynasties, achieving a resounding victory. In this respect, the victory at Mollwitz ensured that Frederick's name would spread throughout the courts of Europe. Although he was not a military leader, and the victory was achieved largely due to the discipline of his soldiers instilled in him by his father and his brave commander, it was nevertheless a victory by any measure. The young king, eager to learn from his mistakes, established a strict training regime for his knights so that they would never hesitate to train. He would rise before dawn and train throughout the day. Naturally, he expected his officers and soldiers to follow suit. Mollwitz was not the final battle between the young king and the Habsburgs, but rather the beginning of the major battles that would shape the greater map of Europe.